the story's a lot longer than Chris makes it sound, to be honest, because it was 10 years ago I actually started writing this, so it's been quite a long and brutal journey to get this far. To do a reading, right. Would you like chapter 2 or chapter 3?
3.
2.
Both. You're not supposed to offer us choices.
Doing requests, like anything. A bit like a pub band. Okay, I'll do chapter 2 because it's all about boats and by the harbour. If I'm too quiet, yell because I speak very quietly. Okay? Yeah, great. Right. This is chapter 2, this is called Archipelago. At the helm of the Thermopylae, Cale Christie pulled the hood of his thick parka back to watch the swollen orange sun slide like a smoky opal beneath the horizon. Above him, the catamaran's white sails rippled and curled as her computer strove to catch the erratic evening wind. To the southeast, a spreading bank of slate-grey cloud marked an approaching storm. To the north, a scattering of small icebergs rocked on the restless swell. During the weeks he'd been in the open sea, Cale's face had been tanned by the wind, sun and salt. His normally shaven hair and beard were grown out and straggled. Ahead of him, in the gathering twilight, he could see the familiar jagged silhouette of Rebecca's Island, with its forest of wind turbines. Their long blades chopped the air, harnessing the winds that blew across the endless ocean. He squinted in the evening light, trying to make out the other islands of the archipelago. The remains of an eroded crater wall, they formed a loose circle of steep-sided peaks 100 kilometres in diameter. Rebecca's Island was at the southernmost point in the circle. On the leeward shore of the next island along lay Cale's destination, the town of Providence. He'd only been away for 6 weeks, but it felt a lot longer. During his time at sea, he'd visited several of the university's scientific outposts, collecting samples and delivering supplies. He'd also visited a handful of scattered algae farms on the volcanic islands around the equator. Before the trip, he'd spent 4 months undergoing a grueling series of treatments for prostate cancer. Although successful, the treatments had left him physically and mentally drained. At his ex-wife's suggestion, he'd left the bar he owned in the hands of its staff and taken this trip as a sabbatical, the first real break he'd had since retiring as a detective almost 10 years before. The freedom and solitude he'd found on the Thermopylae had been a revelation. He'd found time to listen to classical music downloaded to his COM card via satellite from the university archives, to read books, teach himself to fish, and even establish an exercise routine. Each day had helped him gather his strength and clear his mind. He was leaner now, and more muscular than he'd been in years, his body having regained some of the tone that age, illness, and too much time in low gravity had robbed from it. He stretched, rubbed his hands together in the chill air, and taking one last look at the fading sunset, engaged the autopilot. Moving carefully, he made his way aft and climbed down into the cabin. Dogging the hatch, he shrugged off his thick fleece-lined parka and lit an electric lamp. After 6 weeks of solo occupation, the cabin was organised but cluttered. Charts and satellite photos were pinned to the walls, and large soft-screen displays showed real-time weather images. The shelves above were filled with samples of native plastic life, carefully held in place by elastic bungee cord. Cale fried some freshly caught mackerel in olive oil and seasoned it with sprinkles of ground spider hair lichen. The lichen was a tough and stringy native plant found on most of the equatorial islands. It was a little sharp for his taste, but complemented the flavour of the fish. When he was done eating, he pushed the plate aside and dug out a small flask of homemade wine. Although the tumour was gone, there was still residual damage to the surrounding tissue. The pills he took contained microscopic medical robots designed to carry out the necessary repairs without the need for invasive surgery. He washed one down and was pleased to see there was only one remaining in the blister pack, which meant that after tomorrow he could finally put the whole episode behind him. He tucked the pack carefully into a thigh pocket and slipped his feet out of his tough boots. Then he sat back, closed his eyes, and allowed the fatigue of the day to wash through him. The familiar slap and swish of the water beneath the twin hulls relaxed him, and he knew that once he plunged back into the day-to-day running of the bar, he'd miss moments like these, when he was the only person for tens of kilometres in any direction. That knowledge only made the moment sharper and the remaining hours of the voyage more precious. Occasionally, a chunk of floating ice would bump against the bow, tapping the side of the hull as it slid past. The thermopolised twin hulls were plated with a molecule-thick diamond film designed to withstand the rigours of sailing in these ice-filled northerly waters, and he was confident that the autopilot would avoid anything large enough to cause real problems. He was just pouring himself a second glass of wine when his com card chimed. He unclipped the credit card-sized device from the breast pocket of his shirt and held the small readout up to the light. There was a message waiting. He passed his thumb over the DNA security reader to unlock the card, and then using its infrared link, he accessed the large soft screen on the opposite cabin wall. The screen blinked as it interpreted the coming signal, then cleared to reveal his inbox. On top of the list of previously read messages was a new one, unopened. He selected it and brought up a sub-window to display the sender's name, Madeline Walker. It couldn't be her. He checked the name again, frowned at the screen and scratched his head. Madeline Walker had been dead for over 60 years. He had been close to her during the 2 years of the Anastasia's voyage. They'd even been lovers for a time. And although that facet of their relationship hadn't lasted more than a few months, their stormy friendship had remained strong up until her death. He took a deep breath and opened the file. The message consisted of 4 words that initially made no sense to him. He reread them several times as if trying to glean some deeper meaning, but they remained the same. Bring me the key. He switched off the com card. He grabbed his parka and stuffed his feet back into his boots. He opened the hatch and the cold evening air slapped him in the face. He pulled in a frigid lungful, trying to clear his head. Water slapped against the Thermopylae's diamond hull and her sails flapped languidly with the approaching storm. He leaned on the railing and looked up at the darkening sky. The clouds were thickening and there were spots of rain on the breeze. Madeline was dead. She'd been dead a long time. He sat by the helm and tried to make sense of the message. Looking up, he saw the first stars were showing between the gathering clouds. He looked out for the bright and moving one that was the Anastasia, but couldn't find it. Looking down again at the waves hitting the twin hulls of his boat, he replayed the message in his mind. Bring me the key. He scratched his beard. What key?